Cleveland battles for a lower tariff. Please make sure you have copies of the outline of my lecture, the next pages of that 46-page total, so that you can see where I'm going. American industry, which was primarily Republican, had profited from the high protective tariffs. They did not want to be reduced now that it was peacetime. But high duties continued to pile up revenue at the customs houses, and by 1881 the Treasury's annual income in excess of expenditures had amounted to an embarrassing $145 million. Can you imagine if our Treasury today had more money in it than the government could spend on an annual basis? We are in the trillions of dollars in debt. I don't think they could have even imagined $1 trillion in debt. But here, you had a surplus of $150 million in the Treasury. Most of that was from the tariffs that the government continued to collect in the pre-income days. Cleveland felt that, once again, another one of his famous beliefs, unnecessary taxation is unjust taxation. Very important, these two philosophies of Cleveland's. While the Democrats told him, leave this issue alone, Cleveland insisted on bringing it forward and onto the floor of Congress to be decided upon. This ultimately would cost him the next election. The Democrats finally, after 24 years, got a president in the White House, and their hearts are beating happily, laissez-faire. He's leaving them alone in that area. And Cleveland says, no, unnecessary taxation is unjust taxation. I am going to lower the tariff. And his own party, who hates a high tariff, says, no, another day we will fight that fight. But right now, we've finally got a man in the White House. Leave it alone. And Cleveland, remember, strong men make strong enemies, and he is known for the enemies he has made. He is known for doing what was right and not budging. And he says, no, this is wrong, and I am going to tackle it. Well, tackle it after the election. No, I'm tackling it now. It's going to cost you the election. I'm tackling it now. And what does it do? It will cost him the election. Absolutely, just as his party said. Here we've got good old Cleveland. Now, he was a big man too, but he also carried a bit of it in his belly side here. And he is out to cut the tariff and cut the bills that are coming through Congress for high tariffs. Fear of tariff tinkering. Yeah, Mr. President, get those scissors out of here. Don't you tinker with the tariff. Judge was a famous magazine back then. Judge and Puck were big satirical magazines in the 1800s and early 1900s. And another one here. Cleveland files rough edges from the tariff. And this was from the magazine Harper's Weekly. Once again, his views. Public office is a public trust. If I'm in public office, I must do my duty by the public. It's my trust. And the tariff. I got my big old file out, and I'm going to file off the rough edges. Let's get that tariff down to a reasonable rate. And here's good old Uncle Sam. Incidentally, I found out that it was during World War I that the current Uncle Sam that we're so familiar with, that face that has been used ever since. We had Uncle Sam before that time, but the iconic look that has always been Uncle Sam since came out in World War One. So yes, this is Uncle Sam, but he does not have the same look then that he has now. That was a World War One invention. But here is good old Cleveland trying to take the rough edges off of the tariff. The next election, the incumbent, Grover Cleveland, is renominated. The Republicans put up Benjamin Harrison of Indiana. He was stumpy, short legs, short neck. He had a long, well, here it's not so long, but in other pictures you will see, a long blonde beard. He was not an impressive figure at only 5'6". He was, though, a graceful orator, an honest Presbyterian elder, and a prosperous corporation lawyer. He had served, though, only one term in the U.S. Senate. He had risen to the rank of brigadier general in the Civil War on the strength of meritorious combat service. He had sprung from one of the most distinguished families in American history. His grandfather had been president, William Henry Harrison. Remember the old slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. His grandfather had been victor in the War of Tippecanoe, in the Battle of 1812. Tippecanoe and his vice presidential candidate, John Tyler. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Unfortunately, his grandfather only served 31 days as president when he died of pneumonia, shortest lived president of the United States. That was his grandfather. His great-grandfather was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. His family had, in Virginia, long been involved as founding fathers of our nation. So a very respectable family. His grandson now was called Little Ben. They joyously hailed him as young Tippecanoe, and they pictured him as wearing his grandfather's military hat. So here is Harrison. Judge is another. Is that one I mentioned already? Judge magazine. Yes, Benjamin Harrison and Levi Harrison. And here he's rather small in his grandfather's big old huge hat. And here's Uncle Sam. There's a White House in the background which is where he's headed. And Uncle Sam's looking in his grandfather's big hat. Where you been? And of course, 1840 was when William Henry Harrison won on a campaigning slogan of that he was born in a log cabin. No, he hadn't been born in a log cabin. That was all fictitious. But now, 1840, now 1888, Benjamin Harrison. Yes, the two Harrisons, let's run them both and get them elected. Also, the phrase, keep the ball rolling, was from the William Henry Harrison campaign. They had created this huge paper ball, and he was from the Whig Party. The Whigs got two presidents into power, Harrison and Zachary Taylor, both of which die in office. Harrison after 31 days, Zachary Taylor after 16 months, and Whigs couldn't keep their men healthy. But they had the slogan after the Whig meeting in Baltimore, Maryland. They were going to roll this paper ball onto Washington, keep the ball rolling onto Washington from their national convention on. And so that's where we get the phrase, keep the ball rolling, from this campaign of William Henry Harrison. That's an old saying. Who'd have guessed? 1840, someday on Jeopardy. William Henry Harrison election campaign. Yes, they rolled that paper ball from Baltimore, Maryland, all the way to Washington, D.C. Well, for now, young Ben, well, he's not so young, but they create a new paper ball in the likeness of Granddad's in 88 now. As they did then, we roll it now for Gallant Ben. So, same motifs as grandfather. Incidentally enough, we have 4 familio sets of presidents. And if we were actually face-to-face in class, I'd make you come up with all 4 of these. But unfortunately, we aren't. First set is the 2 Adamses, 2nd President of the United States and 6th President of the United States, John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams. Then the next set is this one, William Henry Harrison and Benjamin Harrison. The next one after that is the 2 Roosevelts, Teddy Roosevelt and his 5th cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And then the last one is one you should know. It's in your generation. The 2 Bushes, George Bush and George W. Bush. George Bush is actually George W. Bush, and his son is George W. Bush also, but since his father didn't go by W, his son is going by W. That's how they distinguish him. Same thing with the John Adams and John Quincy Adams. So, and that last one is father and son also. So we've got 2 father and son, grandfather and grandson, and 5th cousins as presidential families. Of all the millions of people in the United States, and how many few presidents we've had, you would think we wouldn't have 8 of our presidents being so closely related. But anyway, Benjamin Harrison is put up by the Republican Party to run against the incumbent. Usually the incumbent will win if he's had a good role in his first campaign. The campaign was waged on a fairly high level, quite in contrast with the Blaine-Cleveland brawl of 4 years earlier. The Republicans, though, struck at Cleveland's character by calling him the Beast of Buffalo. He had married the beautiful 21-year-old during his 2nd year in the White House, Frances. Frances was 21 years old. She was 27 years his junior. Ooh, way to go, Cleveland. And she was his ward. His best friend and law partner was her father. Unfortunately, her father was thrown from his buggy in a buggy accident and killed. And so, as executor of the estate, she was, I think, about 12 at the time when her father was killed. Cleveland, Grover Cleveland, was in charge of her mother and her to take care of them financially because his partner was the father and husband. And so he had already seen much of them being business partners and continued to see much of them, taking care of them taking care of them financially. I am sure she probably viewed him as Uncle Grover, being a 12-year-old girl and him probably over for meals at the house all the time and whatnot. Well, she was in college and 21 years old, and he writes her a letter proposing marriage. You may say, oh, that's nasty. But this is before telephone and all of that. There's not a whole lot of other ways he could have done it other than to have gone in person, which he could have. But you have to understand, this is not just Uncle Grover writing proposing marriage. This is the President of the United States, and he is second year in office at this time, writing 21-year-old Frances, who's in college, saying, hey, would you like to not only marry me, but would you like to be First Lady? Now, how does that sound? Well, she accepts. The Republicans now, and there is absolutely no evidence of this, accuse him of during drunken fits beating his wife while in the White House. Overall, though, the main issue of this campaign is the tariff. His party told him, don't touch it. He says, I'm going to touch it. They said it'll cost you the election, and it does. The nation is flooded with 10 million pamphlets on the subject. The Republicans insist that the tariff was needed to protect American labor with its high wages. You laborers in America demand such high wages. If we allowed these cheap goods to come in from Europe, they give pauper wages to those European laborers. We would have to drop our prices to compete with European wages, and so therefore we would have to drop your wages, you American workers. So it is in your best interest that you workers also fight to keep the tariff high. They also argued with much force that a surplus is easier to handle than a deficit. And I will agree with that. Surplus is easier to handle than a deficit. The possibilities of a lowered tariff spurred the Republicans to frantic action. They raised a war chest of some $3 million, the lushest yet, largely by frying the fat out of frightened industrialists. Frying the fat out of frightened industrialists. What they said was, you pay now so that you help us get a Republican elected, help the Republican campaign chest, or you pay later when the Democrat wins and he lowers the tariff and you lose money because you have to lower your prices. So pay now or pay later. They used this money to line up to pay for voting cattle known as repeaters. And here we have a campaign poster from 1888. Poster for Cleveland and Thurman. Tariff reform. Once again, he is hitting it hard. A public office, a public trust. Once again, I gotta do what the public wants. Public office, a public trust. Unnecessary taxation oppresses industry. We're not even talking about oppressing the public. He says it oppresses industry. Reduce the tariff on necessaries of life. And those voting cattle that they are lining up. The Republicans are using all this money. Here you have a captain of industry who is using the whip of coercion. He is telling his workers, you best get out there and you best vote Republican or else. Back then, you had people that were being paid to be repeaters. The saying was, vote early and vote often. They would go from one polling place to the next, to the next, to the next. They were also, besides being known as repeaters, they were also called floaters. Here, New York City, showing how they would use whatever method necessary. If you can't get there on your own, we will even take you in a wheelbarrow. Here, the cops actually trying to use law and order to arrest a repeater. Now, that is not common. And here, we'll do anything to get the vote out. We'll come out to your house. Here, these women getting anybody. It's raining. We'll hold an umbrella over you. Please just come out and vote. In Indiana, a crucial state, votes were shamefully bought for as high as $20 each. Now, while they got away with that back then, today your vote is very valuable, and you cannot vote early and vote often. It is a felony, not a misdemeanor. It is a felony to vote more than once. Yes, it is a privilege in this nation to vote. And in any election, you are doing good. I don't care how hotly contested it is and how much people are talking about it and screaming about it. If you get 60% of Americans to vote, that is an unbelievable year. We have the right to vote, and we don't even, as a nation, bother to vote. 60% is a very good year. There are countries still out there that people are dying, fighting over the issue of voting. And here we have the right to vote, and we don't even bother to get ourselves to the polls. It's pretty sad. But please, vote only once. It is a felony. On Election Day, Harrison noses out Cleveland. 233 to 168 electoral votes. Cleveland, though, had won the popular vote by 100,456 votes. Ah, dang it. Cleveland will win the popular 3 times, but will win the electoral only 2. That has happened to a couple of presidents. Jefferson will win the popular 3 times, but will win the electoral twice. Andrew Jackson will win the popular 3 times, but will win the electoral twice. Here, he has won the popular 49%, and Harrison has won only 48, not by much, 100,000, but he won the popular. But you got to win the electoral. 58 to 42, 233 electoral votes to 168. Cleveland, though he had won the popular vote, did not win. His first administration, on the whole, was a success. Under pressure to show that the treason-stained Democrats could be trusted to govern in the interests of the nation as a whole, he measured up to the high responsibility. Now, this is not the end of Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland is the only president to serve 2 terms with a defeat in between. He will lose against Harrison. 4 years later, it'll be Harrison and Cleveland again, and Cleveland will win. To come back after a defeat in between is amazing. So you've got Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland. Every president has one number, whether he serves 31 days or whether he serves or whether he serves three terms and a couple of months, which was FDR. You get one number. I'm the 42nd president. I'm the 23rd president. But Grover Cleveland has 2 numbers for his presidency because he had a missed term in between. And I am going to cover the man now rather than later. He is also one of those presidents that goes by his middle name. His first name is not Grover, but we know him always as Grover. His name is Stephen Grover Cleveland. We've had a couple of other presidents do the same. Wilson. Thomas Woodrow Wilson. Yes, his name is not Woodrow. His name is Thomas. Middle name is Woodrow, but we know him in history as Woodrow Wilson. Yes, Stephen Grover Cleveland. And as you can see, even as a younger person, he's not bad, but he's not beauty. And as he gets older and as he puts on weight, honest man. Strikingly beautiful, no. Now, Frances Folsom, that was the name of his business partner, last name. Now, she was a beauty. 27 years his junior. She was 21 years old when she became First Lady. Oh, yeah. And a drawing of their first child. They had 5 children, but ultimately one, Ruth, would die young. And Ruth must have been one of these, because this is a boy, and here you have 2 boys and 2 girls, and so you've got to have another boy. So since only 4 make it to adulthood, one of these has to be the one that passed away. Yes, Francis. And as he gets older, this is actually during his second term, after the Harrison in between, when he is on a yacht and has a private surgery to have part of his jaw removed, and we'll get to that during his second term. Grover Cleveland, Teddy Roosevelt, and this person, I don't know offhand who he is. I probably should have pulled this in and just deleted him, since we cut you off of history. 2 different places, his birthplace. Nice. Now, at the time, I don't know if this was 2 different homes or if they changed that, but, and then his home in Princeton, New Jersey. And his grave site. He is in the center. Frances is on the right. And their daughter, Ruth, on the side. This is quite a privilege for a university to have a president be willing to be buried there. A&M, very similar. You've got Barbara Bush and George Bush were buried there. And the same thing, their young daughter, she was under 5. I don't know exactly. I'm trying to think, something like 3 or 4 years old. And I'm trying to think that her name was also Ruth, I was thinking. Ruth or Laura, something like that. Died of cancer at a very young age. And they exhumed her body on the Bush's request. They said, we want to have her buried with us. And so up at A&M, you have George and Barbara Bush and Laura, I think it's Laura, their infant young daughter, all buried on the A&M campus there. Quite an honor. And here, Princeton, you have the Clevelands buried together. And some stamps of Cleveland. And here you've got Liberia, and here you've got Brazil. So 2 foreign ones. And Benjamin Harrison will be our next president. And we will stop at this point. Take a break.